Hello everyone, I'm Ethys, and this is the first video of a short series I've been wanting to make concerning the recently published Encyclopaedia Eorzea. And from what I've been hearing, most of the people that were really desperate to get their hands on a copy either now have one or soon will. So for those of you who might be worried about hearing spoilers, I think we've waited long enough. That said, this series is going to be about answering speculations I've previously made, some a long time ago, others more recent, with this new wellspring of information and ultimately setting the law straight. Now, this first episode is a little painful for me as it concerns relegation of the origins of the Duskwhite to something less badass than I previously thought. However, it also shows us once again that Lalafels are perhaps the least reliable source of information in the realm. We've been led to believe that the first migrations of Hyur into Eorzea occurred only as recent as the 6th astral era. The Beladians, self-proclaimed descendants of Mark, repelled one of these migratory waves during the 750s and did nothing to dispel the belief that these were the first appearances of Hyur in Eorzea. I had previously speculated that if the children of Mark had no knowledge of Hyur populations previously inhabiting Eorzea, it would be safe to speculate that the Hyur were absent at least during the previous 5th astral era, which had hosted the warring Magi nations of Mark, Nim, and Amdapor. Given that we have long had confirmation that the former two were populated largely by Lalafels, that the Rogaden Seawolves had only arrived from Erzlaint in the far north much later, and that the Elzen are ostensibly the oldest native race of Eorzea with a proclivity for living under the Black Shroud, I had supposed that the Elzen must have made up the bulk of the population of Amdapor. It would follow that the intolerance of the elementals following the War of the Magi had driven some of them north to eventually establish Ishgard, and those that remained were banished far underground, where they would build the subterranean sanctuary of Gelmorra and become the Duskwhite over many centuries. Between this and the similarities between Amdapor and Gelmorran architecture, I had supposed that the Duskwhite were none other than the tortured progeny of ancient Amdapor. It seems, however, that I was mistaken. When the floodwaters of the 6th Umbral era began to rise, each of the major nation-states had their own emergency initiatives prepared, championed by their newly formed grand companies. The Nimians sailed out to sea and attempted to mitigate the incoming tidal waves with powerful barriers cast around their fleet to create a small pocket of relative calm. The Marquis loaded up their ruling class into the Void Ark, hoping to find refuge in the stratosphere. And all those left on the ground, including the rest of Mark, the population of Amdapor, and the stoic Elizans of the smaller states and tribes, all retreated to higher ground, specifically into Ablathia's spine. Among these, a number apparently followed a burning comet, which they took as a sign from Ralga into the northeastern region of Girabanya. When the floodwaters finally receded, the Elzen returned to central Eorzea, most of the Lalafels to Thanolin. A mixed group sailed with Archon Neon Krepf into the far north to found Sharlayan. The disparate tribes that had formed in Girabanya there remained, and after another millennium were unified by a Genghis Khan-like figure named Arnshelm Cotter. This large and primarily Highlander population must have been, by process of elimination, the majority of the surviving Amdapori. Even if we suppose that these Hyur became the Highlanders by natural selection in the unforgiving lands of Girabanya, it follows that the ancient rivals of the Beladians were in fact the same race that they refused to acknowledge had ever before stepped foot in Eorzea, the Hyur. In fact, the Hyur probably made up some part of each of the nations involved in the War of the Magi. The exclusively Hyuran models of undead we have personally encountered in the ruins of Mark and Amdapor begins to make sense. The legacy of Amdapor then does not belong after all to the denizens of Gelmorra or Gridania, as we have long suspected, but primarily to Hyurs that now call our Mhigo home. Given the Beladine ignorance of the Hyur, it stands to reason that any Hyur of Mark also ultimately settled in Girabanya and became part of the unified Alamigo. So this race, which we have been previously told had no real presence in Eorzea before the 6th Astral era, turns out to have had a major part in its history, and the Elzen, whom have supposedly lived here longer than anyone else, remain steeped in mystery. In fact, it was not the elementals that forced the founding of Gelmorra upon the Elzen in the 6th Umbral era, but the waves of Hyur migrants from Ilzabad during the first several centuries of the 6th Astral era. The Elezen tribes that had returned to central Eorzea were at this time displaced by the marauding Hyur, some settling in Ethys, and others forced into the incredibly hostile Black Shroud. When the Hyur followed them even here, and the conflict between the two races was made ever more terrible by the furious elementals, they settled their differences and together retreated underground to build Gelmora, in order to protect themselves from this common adversary in the 8th century, only some 800 years ago. It seems incredible, but it is only in this relatively short time that the Duskwhite have developed distinct from their overdwelling cousins, as opposed to the some 2 millennia that I'd previously speculated. So although the Duskwhites are still clearly creatures born from hardship and adversity, they seem to be the youngest clan in Eorzea by far, and the role and diffusion of the Elezen during the 5th Astral Era, now that their role in the War of the Magi has been called into question, remains a great puzzle. In any case, I think this has been a productive first step towards setting the lore straight, so I hope that you have found it entertaining and informative. If you have any questions, would like me to clarify on any points, or would like to share your own thoughts, do please leave a comment below, and if you enjoy talking and hearing about the lore of Final Fantasy XIV, then like, subscribe, and share this video and this channel with your friends. Until next time, I'm Ethys. Thanks for watching.